feels it going.
All right, what did I miss? Wait a minute, there's an empty seat somewhere. I'm leaving. What did I miss?
You know, we were just talking about comics history in general a little bit. And my memory of this, Mr. Romita, is that Stan hires...
It's Mr. Romita and Stan. I want you to notice that subtle difference. Mr. Stan. Okay, thanks a lot.
John, unless I'm mistaken, Stan hired you and gave you work for the first time without even having met you or knowing you existed. Is that
I might not have done it if I met him.
He was ghosting for fellow artists.
This has been 1950.
1949,
Okay.
first story.
Yeah.
I did a crime story that was so bad that I didn't show it to my children. I still won't let them see it.
Don't believe him. This man has never drawn anything that was bad or that wasn't as good as the best that anybody else could do. And you have I don't like him.
No, if you saw that story, you know how bad it was. My first story that I ever did was Famous Funnies. I did 12-page romance where the girls looked like bony men. And I fell asleep 3 times trying to finish a page in that week, 2 weeks of it. Worst story, Stephen Douglas, who was the editor of Famous Funnies, had a stack like this of artwork on his desk of young artists doing their first story, getting them. Wow, I went right on that.
That's why Famous Funnies went out of business.
Well, he's in heaven, I'll tell you. And when I get to heaven, I'm going to tell him, thank you, Steve.
I gotta ask you.
More than I ever would have done.
John, I gotta ask you, you were infamous for not, and it's crap, we all love your work, but you're infamous for not liking your own work, and you're infamous for always feeling like you should be moving faster on stories. So
I was never fast.
no, so my question, so the very first story you ever did, this little 12-page romance story, you get to the end of it, I can only imagine how frustrated you must have been at the experience. Was there ever a moment where you thought, I don't want to be a comics artist for a
Let
living?
me tell you, when I finished that 12-page story, I thought to myself clearly, I don't think I can think of another panel. I don't think I can decide what to do in another panel. After doing that many panels.
He was not a fast thinker. By the way, you made a mistake.
Yes.
My wife always corrects me on that. You said you thought to yourself. I used to say that, and my wife said to me one day, what do you mean you thought to yourself? Who else could you think to? So always remember that. You don't think to yourself. You just thought. It saves you 2 words. It saves you time. I tend to do that.
That's why I had to get it right. That's the answer. I could only do artwork when somebody else gave me the words.
So you started sort of unofficially at Marvel, sort of under the radar in the late 40s and early 50s. And at what point did John come onto your radar, knowing, recognizing him as a talent, knowing he was somebody you wanted to work with?
You
don't remember that.
You don't remember that, so
My problem is I don't hear that well. And when you talk into this microphone, it sounds to me like, what do you do? So if you have anything to say to me, put the goddamn microphone down.
Let me tell you.
I don't remember meeting this man at all. I don't remember meeting people. I don't have that kind of memory, but I'll tell you about working with him. But do you mind if I don't tell how we met? Do you know how we met? Or you tell that and I'll get around later to meeting with you.
What happened is, I worked for him through this other artist for about 7 or 8 months, and then I got drafted. I went into basic training, and about 6 or 7 months later, I was able to leave Governor's. I was working on Governor's Island, recruiting process. In uniform, I was allowed. I had a Class A pass. I was allowed to go on the ferry, go uptown, and go to the Marvel Comics. It wasn't Marvel Comics. It was time then. And I go in, and this beautiful secretary that he always had comes out, and I said, "Stan's. I've been working for Stan for about a year, but he doesn't know me." I said, "Remind him of Zachary, Lester Zacharin's work." She goes in and she comes out with a script, a 4-page script. And,
Anything you read.
And he knew my name was John Romita, still didn't meet me. So that's why I told you, remember, there was no time to see it. The girl brought it out, told me to ink it, and I had never inked before. So after I felt faint for a while, I said, "To hell with it, I'll fake it."
Well, you mean I gave you a script and I'd never met you?
You never met me, but you saw my artwork.
Yeah. Well, your artwork was more interesting than you were.
I just love his sense of humor.
You see now, when you talk into the mic, I can understand what you're saying because your mouth is a little bit away from it. You talk like this,
No.
All right. By the way, I love this man.
All right, thank you. So you knew you started working with John in the 50s on some of these stories. Do you have any memories of working with him in the 50s?
All right. I'm no good at historical things. I don't remember what his first script was. I don't remember how we met. I'll tell you one thing I remember. This was the greatest man to work with that you could ever find anywhere. He has received so much less credit than he deserves for the Marvel Age of Comics, because anytime anything was needed, if Kirby didn't bring in a job that he was supposed to, and I needed a guy to finish it quickly, if Ditko didn't have time to do a cover or do a strip, and I needed somebody to fix it, if Gene Colan if we needed a script that Colan was doing but he couldn't do the next month, it didn't matter who the artist was that needed a replacement. All I had to do was give it to John Romita, and it was usually done as good or better than the original artist would have done. The only problem is he was so good that I hesitated to give him his own script to stay with, because then I wouldn't have anybody around to do all the emergency stuff. Now, he could do anything. He could do penciling, he could do inking, he could do any script at all. He could draw gorgeous girls, he could do the best action scenes, and I don't even like him personally. I mean, you can believe me, I have no reason to say this. I love this man.
I will point out that means I was highly underpaid.
He was underpaid. I wasn't the guy. Everybody thought that I made up the pay rates. We had a boss named Martin Goodman, the stingiest man who ever lived. I was underpaid, but nobody ever noticed that.
He underpaid you. You were a blood relative.
With some blood relative. I was, wait a minute, the publisher was my cousin's husband. It was a real close time. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, so all right, so you spent some time in Marvel, obviously in the '50s, and then when things started to peter out there, you went full time at DC, right?
Want to hear the story that happened in 1958 when Marvel had to shut down for about 2 or 3 books? I called up Stan's secretary and said I had done about $100 worth of work on my last Western. I'd like you to vouch it. She said, I'm afraid there's no chance. So when I got off the phone, I told Virginia, if Stan Lee calls, tell him to go to hell. And I went to live in D.C. I didn't keep that code in the house, of course. And I never did pay the code out, so you don't have to worry about it.
We still got time. So you were there for 5 years at DC.
7 years, my first. I was 8 years.
8 years.
7 years long.
Right. 8 years.
8 years in DC.
Doing the most beautifully illustrated and most wretchedly written romance stories. Well, actually, you did either, depending on how you count it, you either did hundreds of romance stories, or you did the same exact romance story 100 times. And looking at those stories, that must have been.
It was true, except for Bob Kanigher's stuff.
Yeah.
Kanigher did we did 2 series. Actually, they were like soap operas.
Yeah.
A running story, a book on nurse stories,
right,
and a book on airline stewards.
Right.
And I used to get things from Bob Kanigher like they're on skis at the crest of the hill, and they're kissing. And I used to say to him, Bob, how the hell do you kiss on skis? And he says, trust me, it's been done, I've done it. Now, anybody who ever met Bob Kanigher knows he never skied, let alone kissed a girl.
I've had the pleasure to meet Kanigher, but I got to tell you something about those romance stories. It'll break his heart because it has nothing to do with John at the moment. I used to write almost all the romance stories, but they were supposed to be confessions. And in other words, all the stories were supposed to be written by a girl confessing some terrible problem that she had in her love life. And I, as John knows, I like putting my name down on everything I've done. I have this penchant for enjoying seeing my name in print. And I wondered, how can I say by Stan Lee, if it's supposed to be a girl who's telling about her love life, but how can I not put my name if I wrote the damn story? So I got an idea, and this is one of the few sneaky, tricky things I've done in my very upright and honest existence. I came up with the idea of writing as told to Stan Lee. So on the front page of every story, it would say something like, "My broken heart as told to Stan Lee." Even today, I sometimes get letters tweeted to me, or whatever it is they call it. I saw one of your old romance books. What would make any girl tell all those things to you? So I don't think I really got away with it, and that had nothing to do with what we're talking about. Forgive me for interrupting, but because I don't have a memory, I gotta just talk about whatever I know. I'm not as good as this guy.
So 7, 8 years of what must have been, on a creative level, very dull, very boring at DC.
Yeah.
And then what happens? The phone rings?
No, DC found a closet full of inventory that had never been used.
So much the same as happened at Marvel like 8 years previous.
Same thing. What they did is they closed down the romance department and said, you're a freelancer, go freelance. No severance pay, no sympathy, no nothing. So I went into advertising for 48 hours. I signed up at BDD on a Thursday. One of my neighbors was an advertiser.
That was an advertising agency. Some people may not know that. That's right.
And I signed, and I was going to work with one of my favorite artists. I can't remember his name now. One of the greatest artists. Mort Meskin.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to be in the next booth from Mort Meskin.
Okay.
And that was the reason I wanted to be there.
Sure.
I go to have lunch to say to Stan I'm going to get out of comics. Because he had called me hearing that I left DC. So he gets me to lunch. And he won't remember. You did. And he took me to the Governor Restaurant in New York where there was the most expensive steak in the world. And he charmed me out of the trees.
Yeah.
He spent 3 hours telling me how to be a big fish in a little pond, meaning comics,
Right.
as being a little fish in a big pond, meaning advertising. And by the time we finished that meal, he had me conned. He also guaranteed to match the salary that VPD&O was going to pay me, whether I finished the pages or not.
Okay.
Which I found out later he had no right to give me that.
You've been fired if Martin found out. Martin was the publisher.
But the big businessman who knows what he's doing accepted the deal.
Yeah.
So I find myself in comics, and I wonder where the hell I would have been. 5 years later, I wondered, would I have been one of the art directors up at DVD&O, earning enough money to buy my whole family a new house? I'll never know.
We'll never know.
I will never know.
Well, the artists at the agency, they were doing a lot of newspaper ads in comic form. Remember Stan Drake and artists like that? They don't do those ads anymore. And if you had stayed with them, you'd have eventually come knocking on my
It would
door.
have taken 20 years, but they were doing storyboards. I think Mort Meskin was one of their chief storyboard commercials.
Yeah.
And that would have led to the storyboards for movies. So it probably was not going to be a dead end. But I can't guarantee I would have been, I don't think I would have been entertaining this many people. No, you got to make this don't be practice. So
Comics are where it's at.
I think I made the right decision.
I think you made the right decision too.
I'll tell you one thing about our publisher, Martin Goodman. This man was all heart. The day that he had to let the whole staff go, he walked into my office and he said, Stan, I'm suspending publication for a while. I'm going to Miami. While I'm gone, I'd like you to fire all the artists. This was the best part of my job, getting to do things like that. I will never forget. Twice in my career to do that. But hopefully we came back again, and here we are. We fooled all of you people into buying our books.
Pages I brought in the Daredevil title romance. And he was romance. So he said, nah, it's a little dull. Picks up the phone and says, Jack, I want you to give me 10 pages of the Daredevil story. We'll send you the plot by mail, something like that. Jack Kirby had 20-page. It wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't actual figure drawing. It was like thumbnails. It was stick figures, occasional smiles sometimes, and this is a boat, this is an airplane, this is water. And he would put DD next to a figure of Daredevil and the other initials. So I followed this because it was a pacing guide. It was a way to tell the stories that Stan wanted. Dynamite, quick, bing, bing, bing. Daredevil flies out a window, lands on 2 cars, going uptown. I mean, the whole thing is something I would have never thought of. But after I went through that first story, number 12, the Daredevil to number 12, I already knew what Stan wanted in comics. Jack did the next one too, because he had already finished them before I told him I didn't need them anymore. So he did a pacing guide. There was a diagram on how to tell stories the Marvel way. From that moment on, I got it. And I don't know what the hell, I'm usually up dense, but that time I was usually
Not that.
And we worked on pretty well. I did 6 and 7 issues of Daredevil that I loved. And then he made me leave it.
Then you went on to Captain America?
No, Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. That was
He didn't want to do it.
No,
He wanted to stay on Daredevil.
This is one of the things I love when people interview you about this period, is that you still came at that point from an era of newspaper cartoons where the strip and the creator were synonymous, where if a creator went on, the strip died. There's no reason to keep going. And I believe you're quoted as saying, well, once Steve Ditko left Spider-Man, why are we still publishing Spider-Man?
Well, I felt that way about Spider-Man. I was not smart enough to say that about him. I did say that about Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
I said, what the hell are you going to have to discontinue the FF?
Yeah.
And I said, who the hell can do this? He said, you are.
You are, yeah.
I told him I just came in panicked, and he told me something else to make me more panicked. Yeah, with Ditko, I felt if I ghosted it, if I made it look like it, because I really thought he was coming back. I could not, there wasn't another artist in the business that could have a 3-year success story, gathering steam.
Yeah.
It was building every year.
Yeah.
Give it up. I never believed it. I said, Ditko will be back, I'll do a couple of issues, and I'll be back. They never, I'll be happy. It never happened, and I finally stopped trying to close Ditko with a big headline.
Yeah.
I took out my number 5 brush, and I started making big bold lines again.
Yeah. No, you can definitely tell in the first couple of issues of Spider-Man that you did, that you're...
He didn't ask me to do it.
No, but you're
I
definitely...
felt obliged.
Yeah.
Because if I were to take over Flash Gordon,
Yeah.
I would do it in
That's
my
right.
style. I
Yeah.
would do it in my style.
Yeah.
So in those days, we felt the obligation.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So, what was the work process like back then? Did you write out plots? Did you just talk over plots with John? What did you do?
I don't remember exactly. I think I either wrote out brief outlines or I would just talk to the artist for a while and say, this is what I think the story ought to be. Now go ahead and do it.
By the time I got there, brilliant mind that a steel trap that I have for a mind, I not only did a verbal plot session with him because I happened to be his office every day. He would give plots sometimes over Colin Jack. But he would write up synopses, half a page synopses for a lot of other artists. But I was there, and he said, why write it up? I'll just tell the jerk to do it this way. And the dumb thing about it is I never recorded. Jack Coleman was smart enough to come in and have him record a plot session.
Oh, that's smart.
I was not smart. I said, when I got home, 2 days after I got home, I'd say, I know we talked about 2 possibilities. Which one would you decide?
I'm really upset. I would have thought that what I told you was so brilliant that you could never forget it.
It wasn't brilliant. But I remember that we would discuss, say, 2 ways to do it. And
Either way is okay. Both ways. Everything I say is brilliant. So.
no matter what I came up with, no matter what kind of dumb things I did, like the first Spider-Man story I did the Brooklyn Bridge. In the scene, I did the Brooklyn Bridge in the scene. Stan called it the George Washington Bridge. So that's how coordinated we were. But I will tell what I tell everybody. No matter how wrong I was on the storytelling in my pencils, this man would take those pencils and make them look like every single thing, every nuance was planned perfectly, like we plotted it down to the nuts and bolts. I would tell anybody who asks me, there is no writer in the world that could have done that, and he did it. I used to say, God, it doesn't make sense. It's got holes in that story. When I read the damn script he gave me, the whole thing looked great. Oh, genius.
That's what I love doing the most. I love doing puzzles. And sometimes I get a script from Jack. And I would have told him briefly, Jack Kirby that is, I would have told him briefly what the plot was. But he put in a lot of things that I hadn't discussed with him at all. And I had to figure out what they were, and I had to write it as though it had all been carefully planned and structured and was part of the story, and I loved doing that. The more they threw in things that I didn't know about, the more I enjoyed writing the story, because it made me think and work it out, and it was really fun. And of course, guys like John and Jack and Steve Ditko and all of them, They were so good at story themselves, at telling a story visually, that when you looked at the pictures, everything flowed together. It looked like everything belonged, even if it wasn't what I had told them to do. So all I had to do was put in the words to make it smooth and make it seem that's the way we planned it. It was really a good way of working, I think.
Just let me just interrupt you here. All you had to do.
Oh, here.
Let me just explain. It's 10 comics a month at 20 pages a comic. And I asked him the other night, I asked you last night, how long did it take you to dialogue a 20-page comic?
That whole day.
And you would say, that, yeah, the whole day. And I'm thinking that is phenomenal. That you could hold it down.
Really, part of a day, I'd also go to a movie and be out with my wife. Part of the day, I would do it.
Sometimes you do 2 books when you work at home.
2 books when he works at home. That is, I can't get 8 pages.
But it wasn't hard. The 20 pages were all drawn.
Yeah.
All I had to do was put in the dialogue. Oh, I'll tell you another thing that I felt was incredibly important, and nobody seems to concentrate on that anymore. And that is the dialogue balloons themselves.
Yep.
It is so important to make the dialogue balloon part of the layout, as though you're the artist. And if there's a big space, so if there are 2 heads low down on a panel and they're just talking, and there's a lot of white space up above, you put in the dialogue balloons to fill up that white space artistically, but it gives you a chance to put
Freelance at home?
Oh, yeah.
And at what point?
Oh, no, actually, he told me, I told him that the reason I had gotten out of that, with that, is that I could not discipline myself at home to make enough of a living.
Right.
I was really very slow, and I had artist block. I thought I was burnt out after 8 years of love stories. So I told him, he said, you can come up, I'll give you a drawing table in our production department. You can come and go as you please. You can come in and work, you can stay at home or alternate.
Yeah.
That was the reason I took it, because I had a chance to break that damn fear I had of the blank page at home.
Yeah.
I had a little attic studio that if I don't...
Where did your catchphrase Excelsior come from?
Well, I hate to say that's a good question because you upbraided me last night. Where did your phrase Excelsior come from?
I used to write little editorials and columns like Stan's Soapbox and things, and I would end them with little expressions like, whatever you do, wherever you go, hang loose, or face front, or any little expression I could think of. Little by little, I saw some of those expressions cropping up in DC books. And I said, I've got to think of something that they won't know what it means, and they won't know how to spell it. I happen to notice that the Great Seal of the state of New York, where I live, has the word Excelsior on it, so I looked it up, and it's an Old English word which means upward and onward to greater glory. I mean, what could be better? So I started using that, and they still don't know what the hell it means.